Okay, so welcome. My name is Brianna Marshall Crowe. If you'd like to look up my website at the end of this, is Brianna Marshall Crowe. I am a site-responsive fine artist who was just graduated from NCAD, and I did a joint bachelor's in education and fine art and textiles. So I hold the dual identities of artist and art teacher, which can clash at sometimes. But often my studio projects in the classroom also overlap with one another. I'm going to take us through just the contents of the talk so that we're on the same page. First off, I'd like to talk a little bit about my background and my inspirations and previous projects that I've worked on. Then I will go on to a little bit of art therapy and lockdown. And then we'll talk a little bit about my Quaker ancestor inspiration, and naturally dyed curtains and bioplastics, which are on show in the garden galleries. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about my future plans and goals, and then they'll be open for questions at the end.
You're just starting.
So, to start off, my main inspiration for all of my projects would be my local landscape in the Wicklow Mountains. I live in a beautiful valley that has a lovely river running through it that separates two villages. I've done a lot of extensive research into the soil properties of my local valley to use in my art projects, and I've realised that it is mainly acidic soil. I also live quite close to an area which was sort of inhabited by a group of people who labelled themselves as eco-warriors. So there was a proposition to build a dual carriageway through a beautiful nature reserve and sort of forest. And these people decided to build houses and trees and live there to sort of protest against building that dual carriageway. Now they did still build a dual carriageway, but as a result of their attempts, they don't have any lights in the area, and it's still very much protected. There's speed limits and everything like that. So I have been very much driven towards using my local landscape in all of these projects. I've also been very driven to look at ancient oak trees that grow in my area, like ash trees, willow trees, and primarily actually elder trees grow in my club. So to take us back in time to my second year work in college in fine art textile, I was trying to replicate microscopic bacteria with plastic bin bags using crochet and knit and Photoshop techniques to sort of show that plastic was growing and taking over the landscape. And it turned out to be quite a sort of comedic yet really dark outcome. I'll show you my final piece for that. It's quite short. It's almost like in a sci-fi trailer, I feel. As you can see, that piece that I submitted in second year was quite dark and almost a little bit sinister. I really started to change my sort of feelings towards the work I was creating during lockdown. So I started painting with Bob Ross online with my friends, and we started sort of really getting into painting, and I started to really be able to express my obsession with the ocean in its many forms. Also, since the age of 17, I decided that I wanted to be part of the group that is art therapy. Art therapists. I've always been really, really interested in it, and I've always been really interested in this sort of outlet and expression that we can all use with art therapy. And sometimes it's a language, art is of course a language, and we can sometimes express things that we couldn't really use with words. So yeah, I've always had a love for the sea, like many people have, of course. And I began to paint lots of these different sort of expressions of that obsession with the sea just during lockdown. And then when we came to third year? Yes, third year in college, I started to really just go into that landscape and immerse myself into the landscape in my garden. I started researching all of the soil properties, researching the succession, what kind of soil grows, what grows from that soil naturally. And I started looking at artists like Rosie O'Reilly, Carrie Cahill, both female artists from Ireland who work with pigments and the landscape. Creating natural dyes from quite commonly used pigment producers, but also ones that I found in my landscape, such as nettles, blackberries, elderberries. The common ones are, of course, are turmeric, avocado stone, onion skins. Looking at the work of Alan Brown, I was very, very impressed with Alan Brown because he sort of goes back to those old ways of living, processing nettles that grow, processing flax that grows, right down to it being alive in the ground, and then processing it all the way through to make it actually into a garment. So I followed in that inspiration, and I processed cordyline tree leaves, I processed bamboo, nettle, and corn husks, and I ended up making my own paper, making my own fabric, basically from crocheting yarn. In my exhibition in the Garden Gallery, you'll see a small sample of corn husk yarn that I have crocheted, and it has a small sort of bit coming down. You probably recognise it. That's exactly what it looks like there in crochet. Taking on from this sort of completely immersing myself into the landscape, I tried to use every single resource I could. So I have a number of beehives in my garden, and I processed some beeswax by melting it down, getting rid of all the dirt, and then adding tree sap and maybe some specks of soot. I made these biodegradable buttons. I was really, really excited with these because it was almost like an alternative to what we use today. So to give this entire project a narrative, I found an old photo album in my house, which is an heirloom of Quaker ancestors. So everything about this photo album is just a work of art, really. As you can see the cover here, and then inside, it's just full of stories. So there's some beautiful illustrations on the inside, portraits with absolutely no name, no idea who we are, apart from this man Mordecai, who is, I'm pretty sure he's my great-great-great-granddad. Am I getting that correctly? This book was presented to him. There's a beautiful inscription here, presented by his friends and fellow workers at the Strand Street Institute, which is the Society of Friends, the famous society in Dublin. So taking on from all of this really wealth of information, I decided to go really, really deep back into my family tree, and I found that it dates back all the way to the 1700s in Norway. And I've mapped out my whole bloodline of my family from my mother's side. We go all the way back from Norway down to France, to the Normans, from the Vikings, into England and Wales, and then up to the Lake District, where we lived for a long time, and then over to Ireland. And this is a picture of Rollo Rolf, he's a character in Vikings. I put him in there because it's kind of a claim to fame because he's in my family tree. So just focusing on just the Quakers, I was really, really inspired by their sort of ethics, their way of life, sort of appreciating all of God's creations rather than what we might do, using plastic and nasty chemicals. There's also a beautiful dried collection of seaweed in the back, which my grandmother collected and left in the back of the book. I think that just tells so many stories, and it also gave me this opportunity to incorporate the sea into my artwork. So as a result, I started trying to make my own paper, my own fabric from seaweed, looking at workers like Jackie Whittington, who has created an entire collection using seaweed, all these different materials based from seaweed. There's these sequins made of seaweed that are sort of made from residue after compressing the seaweed right down. So collecting seaweed and studying it in every single way I could. I also harvested some ash tree wood chippings from my garden to create my own cellulose, to try and make my own fabric on my own paper, which maybe wasn't the most beautiful outcome whatsoever, but I'm really, really delighted with the outcomes I got. And this is a sort of sample of some seaweed leather that I made while attempting to make paper. And I feel like that could be sort of a future fabric used to make shoes or clothes or even book covers, anything like that. So going back to Quakers, there's an artist called Anna Atkins who was in the 1800s, and she was a botanist who used beautiful cyanotype to make these gorgeous prints that are really, really detailed. He was also really inspired by Lay of the Land collective, who made this huge, big, long curtain almost, really long piece of fabric that was cyanotyped with seaweed like spaghetti, I think is the name of it. And as they left it in the salt water, this colour sort of started to change and grow up a bit. So inspired by that, I dyed a huge piece of fabric, a curtain, that I used with alcohol, surgical alcohol, sodium spirit and turmeric. And then I lay it out in the garden with some seaweed on top of it to let the sun reach out the areas around it. So what I was left with was almost like a print, a sun print, which is called anthrotype, which is the opposite of cyanotype. So it sort of leaves a dark mark where the object is printed, where it's left. And these were the results. I was really, really pleased with them. But what I soon realised was that the magnesium that was in the seed started to leak into the fabric with moisture from rain or dew. And this caused a sort of pH alteration, which turned the colour red. So I was really excited with this, of course, because all of a sudden I'm going from fine artist to sort of designer and scientist, where I'm pH of this naturally dyed curtain, piece of fabric. And I decided to paint some baking soda and water onto it to alter pH and make it red. And I also found that adding lemon juice to it turns it sort of a neon yellow. So I was building up layers and layers of colour with this curtain, which is now, this setup is also on show in the gallery. So going back to those biodegradable buttons I made a semester beforehand, I started experimenting with tree sap and seaweed, tree sap and coffee grounds, seaweed and beeswax, whatever I could get my hands on that would potentially be from the landscape kind of garden. I also studied, of course, how they change and grow and they sort of biodegrade. Because 15 minutes later, the seaweed and the tree sap is completely biodegraded. Moving on, I started to just use seaweed, beeswax and tree sap to make all these different molds of buttons, all these different molds of cutlery, to try and practice making a sort of more usable alternative to the plastic. And I'll pass around a little sample of one of the buttons for you guys to see.
Sorry, Brianna, the one that disintegrated, what, that didn't have the wax in it? Is that,
No.
okay, is that the only material that was missing?
Yes, for these ones, yes. These ones actually take a lot longer to biodegrade.
This doesn't disintegrate.
It takes a lot longer, but it definitely will. So, I tried to use, again, trying to explore as much as I could. I made sugar cutlery by the same methods of making caramel to see how I could cut knives and eat food with cutlery sugar. It tasted awful. There's also some cutlery that I made out of molds of my own takeaway cutlery, using tree sap and seaweed, and then the beeswax cutlery, which is sort of my final prototype to put forward as the exhibition. I even tried to design my own cutlery so I wasn't using someone else's design, and again, not amazing, but we're on the way.
I'm sorry, the tree sap, or how did you get hold of that?
Pine tree resin, I sourced it online, but I could.
You bought it rather than tap the tree first, or something?
I could have done that, but I sourced it online.
That's okay.
So with the bioplastics, these are also on show in garden galleries in a separate area. I've experimented loads with these using cornstarch and potato starch, using water, adding a bit of glycerin, maybe some vinegar sometimes, and seaweed was the main ingredient in every single piece I made. So there are loads of different varieties that I made, different colours, different textures, different durabilities. Some of them resemble cling film, some of them resemble like hard plastic, like a bottle maybe, or maybe even a plastic tub. They're so solid. These bioplastics were also exhibited in the Skibbereen Arts Festival exhibition, as well as in Ballyton Hall in Kilcoe for the month of August. Very exciting together. Here is an video of testing flexibilities, just to show what kind of textures they have, what kind of hardness they have. And this is how they are exhibited inside Infinite. So quite minimal, again going with those Quaker ethos, Quaker values, going back to basics. All of them are made from natural ingredients as well. And playing with the table setting and that domestic kind of atmosphere, going right back to the family setting and the ancestors. I wanted to create alternatives to buttons and cutlery for that domestic kind of theme, and using the curtain as well to show all of that natural dye experimentation I did. And going back to that previous video I showed you from my artwork, both messages are kind of similar. They both talk about preserving the landscape, but this project I feel is a whole lot more positive for my own well-being as well. It's not so much looking at like pointing a finger and pointing out what's damage to it, and that's important as well, of course. We need to be able to relate and be aware of these things. But for my own practices and being an influencer for students, I much prefer to look at the amazing possibilities that landscape poses to us, bring us. So the whole title of the piece is Live Off the Landscape, and it was longlisted in the RDS Visual Art Awards. I really wanted to hone in on the domestic, so it's using an old potting shed taken from my mother's shed to show that simplicity as well. It has samples of crochet yarn, the buttons, the curtain, and the cutlery, which are a prototype for a potential design for future function, more experimentation into bioplastics. So my future plans for this are to study sustainable textile engineering in a university called Hafen University in Germany. I'd really like to look at the science behind the dyes and learn a bit more about that, and then also experiment with maybe making cutlery that's really usable, because a lot of them tend to dry and shrivel, similar to the plastics I presented, which can be interesting for a sculptural material, but I'd really like to explore the actual functional thing. I'd really love to hear any questions you guys might have now. Open the room, or any comments you have.
Do you have other insects attracted to these materials?
Not that I know of. Not yet, no. Not yet. None of them are making food.
Rats?
No, not yet, anyway. The dog.
What type of seaweed, or were you just taking random mix?
Mainly bladderwrack from the local harbour, which is about 10-minute drive from my house.
Was there a reason you chose bladderwrack?
I'm pretty sure that lady Jasmine Linton, she used bladderwrack.
Who?
Jasmine Linton.
Oh, you mentioned her, yeah.
Yeah, so she's from Scotland, and her local seaweed bladderwrack as well. I also used carrageenan, which is used as an alternative for
Gelatine.
Gelatine, yes.
Would you consider yourself more a fine artist or a designer?
That's
You both.
honestly both, yes. I'd really like to explore the bioplastics as a sculptural material, but I'd also really like to, there's a huge opportunity here to look at a future made from bioplastics, with cutlery, with buttons, with anything that we use in plastic. A friend has requested a mug, so I have to work on that.
Should you be using the term plastic at all?
Sorry?
Should you be using, bioplastic as a term, or should it be bio?
Yeah, absolutely, actually. I think we should definitely work on a new
In
name.
my understanding is the word plastic is plasticity, and actually apparently plastic, what was made with resin by tribes hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago wasn't plastic. I think we just modernised
That
them.
meaning has changed.
I think we just, yeah, exactly, we modernised the word, like the word organic, I suppose.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
been changed.
How it works, meanings are
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also if you want people to consider it as an alternative, you have to be quite explicit about what it could be an alternative for.
linking it to it.
Yes.
Otherwise, they might not realise what you're trying to do with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And kick out recycled into circularity. Throw it back into nature.
Or maybe you won't even think about what's made of. It's just a spoon. It works.
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, I did try and eat some soup with the cutlery. Work with the spoon.
I love it.
Well, if there's no further